The news of Ned Stark's execution had traveled across Westeros like wildfire, but what most didn't know was that Lord Varys, ever the Spider, had played a deeper game than anyone realized. The real Ned Stark had not been beheaded in King's Landing. It was a political illusion, a deal made in the shadows between Varys and the Silent Sisters. A condemned criminal with a similar frame had taken Ned's place, while the real Lord of Winterfell was quietly smuggled out, his survival known to only a few. Ned had woken up in a dim room beneath the Red Keep, confused and weak. Varys stood over him, holding a torch, his expression unreadable. "Your honor nearly got you killed, Lord Stark," he said, "but Westeros needs you still." "Why?" Ned had asked bitterly. "Why not let me die with my pride?" "Because a storm is coming," Varys replied, "and when the Dragon Queen lands, this realm will need men of honor." For months, Ned Stark moved in shadows, carried on ships, and through hidden paths. He saw lands he had never imagined: Volantis, Lys, and finally Miran. His heart was heavy with guilt and confusion. His daughters believed him dead. His sons were scattered. He was no longer a lord, but a ghost, living on borrowed time. Still, he followed Varys's path, unsure where it would lead, till the day he stood before Daenerys Targaryen. She was younger than he imagined, fierce-eyed and regal, sitting atop a throne that once belonged to slavers. Her dragons loomed in the background, restless and protective. "This is the man who was hand of the king to your father's usurper," Ser Jorah sighed, eyeing Ned with suspicion. "And yet he once saved my brother's life," Daenerys answered calmly. "Why are you here, Lord Stark?" Ned bent the Ninnet as a loyal subject, but as a tired man honoring the strength he saw in her. "I came not for politics, Your Grace. I came because Westeros is broken. I have failed my family. But if you are what Varys believes, then I will serve not as a lord, but as a man who wants peace." There was a silence in the throne room. Then Daenerys nodded. "Rise, Lord Stark. We have much to speak of." And so began an unlikely alliance. In the days that followed, Daenerys questioned him often about Robert, about Jon Arryn, about the rebellion. Ned answered with brutal honesty. He told her about Rhaegar, and with trembling voice, about the lies that led to war. One night, he told her something that changed everything. "Your nephew lives," he whispered. "His name is Jon Snow, but he is not my son." Daenerys froze. Rhaegar and Lyanna loved each other. They were married in secret. "Jon's name is Aegon Targaryen?" The fire in her eyes dimmed into confusion, betrayal. "You mean I'm not the last?" Ned bowed his head. "You are still a queen, but you are not alone." That night, Daenerys didn't sleep. Neither did Ned. And in the dawn that followed, Westeros took one step closer to a storm fiercer than ever before. Ned stayed in Miran longer than he'd ever thought he would. It was strange for a man who had spent his life in snow and stone walls to now walk among warm sands and marble palaces. But the heat wasn't the only thing that made him uncomfortably, was the dragons. The Unsullied, the whispers around Daenerys. She was powerful, yes, but too many people around her treated her like a god. And Ned had seen what blind devotion did two kings. Daenerys, on the other hand, found herself strangely drawn to the quiet northern lord. He didn't flatter her, he didn't fear her, and he didn't want anything from her. He spoke plainly, even when it stung. Especially when it stung. One morning, as they walked the halls, she asked him, "Why did you protect Jon Snow's secret for all these years?" Ned stopped walking. His face looked older in the morning light. Because I made a promise to his mother, and because Robert would have killed him the moment he knew. Daenerys clenched her jaw. He is my blood, my only family. Ned gave a small nod. And perhaps your biggest threat. The words were like poison, but deep down she knew he wasn't wrong. That evening, Tyrion Lannister arrived. He had come from Westeros bearing grim news. Cersei has allied with Euron Greyjoy. The North has named Jon Snow their king, and the dead march beyond the wall. Daenerys turned to Ned, her voice low. If Jon is truly Aegon Targaryen, he has more claim than I do. Ned looked her in the eye. Then don't make it a war of claims. Make it a war for survival. A week later, the ships were ready. Daenerys, her army, her dragons, and now Ned Stark sailed toward Dragonstone. The world would soon learn that fire and ice had decided to stand side by side. But peace never comes easy in Westeros. Upon landing, Ned met Davos. There was no need for introduction. The Onion Knight had known of him for years. Lord Stark, Davos said, bowing slightly. It's good to see someone with sense. Let's hope we still have time for sense, Ned replied. Then came the meeting that no one expected. Daenerys stood in her throne room. The doors opened. Jon Snow walked in. He froze when he saw the man beside her. Ned. Ned's voice trembled. Hello, Jon. Jon rushed to him, eyes wide, not believing. They said you were dead. I was supposed to be, Ned said, but I had promises to keep. Daenerys watched silently as the two men embraced, the truth between them now too heavy to hide. She stepped forward. You are Aegon Targaryen, rightful heir to the Iron Throne. Jon looked at her, stunned, then at Ned. Is this true? Ned nodded, guilt heavy in his voice. I raised you as my own to keep you safe. Jon turned away, fists clenched. You should have told me. I know, Ned whispered. Daenerys stepped closer. This changes nothing between us. We fight the dead first, then we talk about thrones. But her eyes said otherwise. That night, ravens flew across the realm. The north would march, the south would scheme, and as dragons circled Dragonstone, Westeros stood on the edge of a blade torn between truth, power, and the ghosts of its past. The days that followed were a blur of tension and preparation. The armies gathered in Sullied, Dothraki, Northern, Bannermen, and even the remnants of the Brotherhood without banners. Everyone knew what was coming, the Night King and his army of the dead. But beneath that shared purpose, deeper tensions brewed like poison beneath a calm sea. Ned Stark and Jon Snow spent long hours together, talking like father and son, but also like two men now carrying the burden of truth. Jon struggled with the revelation of his true heritage. I never wanted any of this, he told Ned one night, his eyes lost in the firelight. I was happy being just your bastard. Ned's voice was heavy with remorse. And I was happy pretending you were mine. But we can't choose our blood, Jon. Only what we do with it. Daenerys, meanwhile, felt her grip loosening. People looked at Jon with awe. The North followed him, not because of dragons or destiny, but because they loved him. She noticed the glances, the whispers, even from her own advisors. Tyrion spoke in measured words. The people love him, they trust him. That makes him dangerous. To whom? She snapped. To anyone who sits on the Iron Throne. She walked the cliffs of Dragonstone often, watching the sea crash against the rocks. wondering if she was losing more than just her crown. And in those moments, she'd find herself thinking of Ned Stark, how calm he was, how deliberate. She began to ask for his counsel more than anyone else's. It wasn't affection, not yet, but it was something that felt almost like trust. One evening, as snow began to fall, even at Dragonstone, a raven arrived. The wall had fallen. Winterfell had become the front line. The march began the next morning. Daenerys flew ahead on Drogon and Rhaegal, with Jon riding beside her. Ned rode with the Northern Army, side by side with old Alice Dormund, Davos, even Arya, whom he embraced at the gates of Winterfell with tears in his eyes. "My little girl," he whispered. "You shouldn't be alive," she said, but clung to him anyway. "But I'm glad you are." Sansa, colder than the snow around them, greeted him with a stiff nod. "You always did have a habit of keeping secrets." He nodded, unable to argue. "I hope I still have time to make things right." In the halls of Winterfell, tension reached a peak. Jon, Daenerys, and Ned stood with the Northern Lords, planning the battle. Gendry worked day and night forging dragonglass weapons. Bran, the three-eyed raven, sat quietly, speaking only when needed. "The Night King is coming for me," he said. "That's where he will strike." And yet, even as the dead approached, politics never truly died. Sansa took Ned aside one evening. "She wants the throne more than she wants peace," she said of Daenerys. "Be careful who you give your loyalty to." "I swore to fight for the living," Ned replied. "That includes her." "But for how long?" Sansa asked, her voice low. Outside the walls, the sky grew darker. The wind howled like wolves, and in the cold night, the dead began to gather. Winter had come not just to the land, but to the hearts of everyone who had something to lose. The Battle of Winterfell began under the cover of a moonless night. Snow fell in thick, heavy sheets, muffling even the whispers of fear that ran through the ranks. The front lines were set and sullied. Dothraki, northern warriors, knights of the Vale, even wildlings all ready to face death together. Dragons circled overhead, screeching into the blackness. But even their cries could not silence the coming storm. Ned Stark stood beside Jon on the battlements. The sight of his ancestral home surrounded by undead horrors twisted his stomach. He had fought in wars, seen men die for honor and pride. But nothing could prepare him for the cold emptiness that the White Walkers brought with them. The Dothraki charged first, their arcs set ablaze by Melisandre. For a heartbeat there was light, then it was gone. Screams followed, then silence. Daenerys watched from atop dragon, her face hard. "We can't wait," she said, and dove into the chaos with fire blazing from the skies. Jon followed on Rhaegal, flanking her. But even dragonfire felt like a matchstick against a frozen sea dot inside the castle walls. Arya moved like shadow and steel, cutting down whites with swift fury. Gendry fought beside her, bloodied but unbroken. Brian, Jaime, and Podrick held the gates, while Sansa and Tyrion sheltered in the crypt Saronic. Given the dead didn't rest anymore, and in the gods, Bran sat under the weirwood tree, eyes glazed as he warged into ravens, searching. Protecting him were Theon and his men, but Ned Stark insisted on joining them. "I will not let my son face death alone." Theon had bowed his head in shame. "You still call him your son?" Ned had placed a hand on his shoulder. "You were my ward. You were my responsibility. What happened to you doesn't erase that." Theon had said nothing more, but in his eyes something broke, or maybe something healed, as the dead poured. in battle turned into survival. The courtyard of Winterfell became a slaughterhouse. Grey Worm bled beside Davos. Jorah died saving Daenerys. Tormund roared like a madman, burying his axe into the neck of a giant wight. And Jon chased the Night King across the battlefield, determined to end it himself. But the Night King didn't come for Jon. He came for Bran. And there, under the ancient weirwood, Ned Stark faced the creature he once believed was just a northern tale. His sword, ice, long melted down by the Lannisters, had been replaced by a blade of Valyrian steel black fire, gifted to him by Daenerys herself. "You do not belong here," Ned said. As the Night King approached, the Night King said nothing, only raised a hand. The dead rose around them. Theon fell first, taking 3 wights with him. Then Ned fought, swinging with precision, rage, and old strength. But he was just a man, and they were many. He was brought to his knees, bloodied, exhausted. The Night King stood before him. Then, in a blur of silence, Arya Stark leaped from the shadows. The Valyrian dagger glinted as it moved through the air. The Night King caught Herb. Arya let the dagger drop, catching it in her other hand, and drove it into his heart. The Night King shattered into ice and dust, and with him all the dead collapsed. For a moment the world was silent. Then the cries of the living rose, cries of disbelief, victory, mourning. Ned, barely standing, looked up at Arya. "You've grown," he said with a faint smile. She smiled back through her tears. "You always said I'd be different." That night, Winterfell burned its dead. The living tried to remember how to breathe, but the war was far from over, because the Iron Throne still waited, and the question of who would sit upon it now burned brighter than ever. After the battle, Winterfell was quiet, too quiet. The dead were gone, but so were many of the living. The snow was stained with blood, and the air smelled of ash and sorrow. Funeral pyres burned day and night. Jorah, Theon, Beric, Eeti, Lyonor, names that would echo in the halls of memory. But for Ned Stark, there was no peace. He stood at the gates, looking at the sky, knowing that though they had defeated death itself, the worst kind of war was still ahead, the war of men. Jon Snow had changed. The battle had hardened him, but it was the truth of who he was that truly tormented him. He avoided Daenerys now, barely spoke to her. And when he did, it was always about duty, never love. Daenerys noticed, and so did Tyrion. "He's slipping away from you," the hand told her carefully. "And people are starting to wonder why the Queen listens more to a dead man returned from hiding than to her own blood." She looked at him coldly. "You mean Jon?" Tyrion swallowed. "You know what I mean." Meanwhile, in secret meetings by candlelight, Sansa and the Northern Lords began to stir. They loved Jon, but they didn't trust Daenerys. They spoke of burning cities, of foreign blood. "She is not one of us," they whispered. "She will rule like her father." Ned caught wind of these talks. He confronted Sansa in the Godswood. "Don't let your pain turn into poison," he said. "She is not a Stark," Sansa replied coldly. "You taught us to protect the North. I'm trying to do that, by dividing us again, by surviving." He stared at her, heart heavy. "I died trying to do the right thing. Don't make the same mistake I did." But it was already too late. Seeds of doubt had taken root in every corner. Then came the Raven. Cersei had executed Mizendeu. She stood atop the Red Keep, flanked by Euron Greyjoy and the Mountain, watching as Daenerys screamed in helpless rage. Dracarys Miss Zendaya had said with her last breath. And now Daenerys was coming for blood. The march south began with tension thick as armor. Jon, Daenerys, Tyrion, Arya, Sansa, and Ned rode together, but it felt more like a funeral procession than a royal campaign. At Dragonstone, Daenerys stared into the flames for hours. She no longer wept. She no longer listened. She only waited for fire and revenge. One night, Ned walked into her chambers unannounced. She looked up, eyes red but cold. "You want to stop me?" she asked. "No," he said. "I want you to remember who you were. You came to break chains, not build pyres. They killed my friend," she whispered. "They killed my people. They killed my family too," Ned said quietly. "But vengeance has no end, only graves." She looked at him long and hard. "You still think Jon should sit on the throne? I think Westeros needs peace, not a ruler with dragons, a ruler with a heart." There was a long silence. Then she asked, "And what about you, Lord Stark? Would you sit on it?" He laughed bitterly. "I've had my time in the shadows. All I want is to see my children grow old." But deep down, even he knew none of them were walking out of this war untouched. In King's Landing, Cersei prepared her final defense. Wildfire caches lay hidden beneath the city. Euron commanded the fleet. The Golden Company stood ready, and somewhere in the depths of the Red Keep, Jaime Lannister had returned not to save her, but to end her as the bells of war rang out. Ned Stark mounted his horse, looked at Jon, and said quietly, "No matter who wins, something in us dies. Today." And then the dragons flew. The city of King's Landing stood under a dark sky. Its people terrified, trapped between two monsters, Cersei Lannister on one side and fire-breathing dragons on the other. Daenerys flew above on dragon, her face, blank eyes, burning. Below her, the army of the north and the Unsullied waited at the gates. Jon Snow rode at the front. Ned Stark beside him, the weight of all his past failures clinging to every breath. The Golden Company didn't last long. One burst of dragon fire tore them apart like dried leaves. The Iron Fleet, once Euron's pride, turned to burning wood. In seconds, Daenerys had every reason to end the war cleanly. And then the bells rang, surrender, surrender, mercy, but Daenerys didn't stop. She looked at the Red Keep where her family had been slaughtered, where her father had been betrayed in fire. Took her, she attacked. The city screamed. Innocents ran. Children burned. The dragon became a god of vengeance, and Daenerys, the Queen of Ashes. Ned watched in horror. He turned to Jon. "Stop her." Jon looked up, frozen by what he saw, the woman he once admired, now burning a city alive. Arya barely made it out. Alive, she raced through collapsing buildings, saving a mother and daughter only to lose them in a wall of flame. Her face, covered in ash and blood, carried a single thought now. Daenerys must die. Tyrion found Jaime and Cersei in the depths of the keep. He tried to free them, but the walls were already collapsing. Jaime and Cersei died together, not in battle, but in rubble, just as Tyrion had always feared. After the flames ended, the silence was worse. King's Landing was ashdot. Ned Stark walked through the city, his boots crushing blackened bones. He saw children without faces, women clutching burnt corpses, soldiers burying swords in surrendered men. This wasn't justice. This was madness. That night, in what remained of the Red Keep, Jon Snow stood before Daenerys. She smiled at him. "We did it. They're free now." Jon looked around, broken, free. They're dead. They were never going to follow us, she said, eyes wild. But they will now. They have no choice. He kissed her and then drove a dagger into her heart. Daenerys gasped, eyes wide with betrayal. She died in Jon's arms, not as a queen, but as a broken dream. Drogon arrived moments later. The dragon roared in grief, but did not kill Jon. Instead, it melted the Iron Throne, turning it into a puddle of molten steel, proof that power only leads to ruin. He flew away with Daenerys's body, vanishing into the clouds. Days later, the council met. Tyrion, Arya, Davos, Brienne, Sansa, Gendry, Sam, and Ned Stark. They sat in silence, surrounded by the ruins of a kingdom. Tyrion stood. It's time to break the wheel. We need a new way. Voices argued. Sansa wanted the North's independence. Gendry supported Jon, but Jon refused the crown, now imprisoned for killing the queen. Arya wanted no part in ruling. Sam suggested democracy and was laughed off. Then eyes turned to Ned, the man who had survived death, the man who had warned them all. He stood, weary. I don't want a throne. I want peace. But if I must help guide this realm to that peace, I will. Not as a king, but as a hand, to someone we can all trust. And so, in an unexpected turn, it was Bran Stark who was chosen, the broken, the one who had seen all. And Ned Stark became his hand, just as he once was to Robert. The North became independent under Queen Sansa. Arya sailed west, seeking a world beyond maps. Jon returned to the Night's Watch, a man who had given everything. And Ned Stark, the ghost of honor and loss, now stood beside a king who wanted nothing. He walked the halls of King's Landing alone sometimes, watching as stone replaced ash as hope returned slowly. He had lived to see the world nearly end, and maybe, just maybe, he would live to see it heal.